Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CS Leadership Roundtable. My name is Andrew Marks, co-founder of Success Hacker and our Success Coaching Training Program. We're back for our monthly live leadership roundtable today, discussing how to approach building out an education program to support your customers and your employees. This free learning event is brought to you by Success Coaching, the world leader in customer success professional development training with more than 5,000 graduates globally. Our training programs are available as pure online learning, monthly virtual instructor-led boot camps, both public and private, and a hybrid 12-week coaching program that runs 3 times a year. We also offer a number of standalone courses, all taught by industry experts. We're in the process of rolling out our level 5 of our certified CSM curriculum, and Monday, we launched the first leg of our new management track with our boot camp, What Successful Managers Do, an entry-level management training program for customer success leaders or those aspiring to be. You can find out more about our programs at successcoaching.co. Ashley will drop the link into chat. Now, for those of you that have not participated in one of these events before, this is a live and unscripted discussion where we dig into a single topic that is relevant to customer success leaders. This right here is the only script that I follow during the entire webinar. Regardless of the company that you work for, the scope of your role, the size of your customers that your team deals with, we aim to pick topics that are going to be practical and useful to you. We also encourage you to suggest topics and guests for this program. So reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn and drop me a note. The schedule for our upcoming CS Leadership Roundtable events can also be found at successcoaching.co under the events tab. As usual, we will post a replay of this webinar along with a transcription early next week on our website. Now, there's a lot of thought leadership out there, along with a lot of theories about how to deliver customer success. This series allows us to focus on the practical and give you real-world advice, best practices, techniques, and shared experiences from those out in the wild that are practicing and leading customer success on a daily basis. And to do that, we invite 3 panelists to join me for a roundtable discussion. These are people who are great at their craft, and we ask them to share their experiences and their perspectives. We will be taking questions later on during the webinar, so use that Q&A button found at the bottom of your screen to ask or upvote a question. And also, please keep any commentary to the chat window. So without further ado, I would like our panelists to introduce themselves to y'all, talk a bit about who they are and what they do. As usual, in alphabetical order, let's start with Adam.
Love having a name that starts with A. Hello, everyone from sunny Oakland, California. My name is Adam Evermescu. My pronouns are he, him, his. And I lead enterprise customer education at Slack. I also co-host the C-Lab Customer Education podcast with Dave, who'll introduce himself in a moment. And I'm the author of a book called Customer Education, Why Smart Companies Profit by Making Customers Smarter. It's good to talk to you today.
Love it. Thanks, Adam. Thanks for being here. Now on to Danielle.
Thank you, Andrew. Danielle Campbell. I lead the education and enablement function at Infor. I've only been there about 5 months. And it spans customers, partners, and employees for technical role excellence. My core audiences from an internal perspective include CSMs, support, and global professional services. And then, of course, all the partner delivery partner enablement, and then customer education and all the product development for that. I have spent my entire career in customer education. It's a real job. And can span a lifetime, and done almost every role there is to do, from teaching to selling to writing curriculum to leading education functions at places like Red Hat, Hortonworks, Adobe, SAP. So super excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks for being here, Danielle. Yes, and I can attest to that. Danielle I've known Danielle a lot of her career, and she has been doing this education thing for a long time. So I appreciate you being here. And last but not least, David.
Hey, I'm Dave Darrington. Thanks, Andrew, for having us on the show here. I'm currently at Outreach. So if you've heard of Outreach, we're one of those rapidly growing, rapidly scaling companies. So it's a perfect cauldron of learning and fun for customer education. I lead the customer education team here, been here a couple of years. You may have, Andrew, we met when I was working at Gainsight, so that's some of my alum status. And also, as Adam mentioned, I'm thrilled to be a co-host of the Customer Education Laboratory podcast, which has been fun. We've been meeting a lot of people and learning a lot of stuff and applying those techniques to what we do every day. So
but where's my invite? I haven't got an invite to your podcast.
It's coming. Yeah. We're slow. We don't do too many. We have a limited bandwidth.
We had to wait to get through mine before you let go. Well, let's see how the experience.
We hear you like to do episode 100, so
it's not far away. Only what, 37, 36?
Helping sales radio. No, that's great. All right, thank you to you all for making the time for us today. I'm really excited about the upcoming conversation because what's also great is you all know each other, and you've all known each other for a long time, which is fantastic. So let's get to the topic at hand. Education programs help users learn how to get things done in a more independent and efficient manner. Education programs can also create a more positive, effective experience for both customers and customer-facing employees. And customer education is one of the key enabling factors of driving adoption. Many customer success teams take on a lead role in the onboarding of new customers, teaching users features and functions as part of the broader overall change management effort required to support adopting a new way of doing things. This is typically done in a one-to-one manner, repeating the same instructions and concepts over and over across their entire book of business. But as your customer base grows, it's a lot more practical to roll out formal education programs to support your scaling efforts and free up CSM time to focus on the change management challenge involved in creating a new habit and more strategic thinking and planning with their customers. With a formal education program, you're able to produce a set of standard training programs delivered in a consistent manner to entire cohorts of customers. Besides the benefits of scale, you create consistency in the experience and ensure that the right information is being conveyed. Your CSM can then focus on going deeper with users who need that extra layer of help or personalizing for their use case and driving adoption through those change management efforts. So my first question to the group is, where do CS leaders start with this? And why does it benefit a CS leader to invest in customer education?
All going to be quiet here.
I'll go ahead
and jump in.
Yeah.
So particularly having come from and lived in Gainsight, at the height of the customer success revolution, or at least at like one of the big peaks of it, you started to see, it was really interesting to see, what was the interest of Gainsight itself in education? How did this function play out? So I want to just share several different points on why any customer success leader should immediately be thinking about customer education if you don't already have a program. So let's think about it. What matters? Churn, retention, adoption, call deflection, onboarding. I can go on, right? All of these things we have an influence on with education. And one of the problems that you have as you're growing your org. So, I'm talking to all of you customer success leaders that maybe you're on the early phase of your trajectory. At Outreach here, we're kind of on the tailing end. So we have a lot of those things. But let's say you're just starting out. You want to get going. You by building a program, you're offloading, kind of like Andrew, you're saying, you're freeing up runway for your team to do the work they're called to do. I think as we start out, a customer success professional, CSMs will do training. Professional service people do training. But as you grow, you're not going to have time for that. I could throw out a number. At one point, I was looking at numbers and how much our customer success team that one of the companies that I work for trained in the course of 6 months, and it was something like 3,000 hours. And like 3,000 hours, that's a lot of a human being's time that could be taken up by one person who's making scalable, repeatable content that anybody can read. So I'll stop there with my intro. And Adam, Danielle, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with everything that you said. I think it's interesting. I was sharing with these guys just before we got started. This is the first time in my entire customer education career that I've reported into the customer success organization. So my boss is the chief customer officer, which I'm super happy about. I think it's really the right place for education to be. And I think we're all balancing that delicate divide between free to fee and included or not included and all of the different things. And so one of the conversations that myself and our customer success leader, for example, have very frequently is, what's the definition of product adoption? How do you scale that product adoption? Is it really just knowing the features and functions? Or am I going to also impart upon the users the value that they're going to get out of the solution that they've selected, right? So is a CSM better positioned to really go down the value proposition because they understand the customer's configuration personally, feels more personalized, whereas education services, I had written an article for LinkedIn a while back now that my opinion was, education is the original customer success organization, right? We've always been in it to scale the product adoption. And as the emergence of customer success managers and teams and focus in software and systems happened, education started to get a little sidelined, right? It was kind of like, oh, you don't know enough about the customer. And so I think there's a really healthy balance between developing your customer education businesses, like you said, Dave, for scale, right? Reach as many people as possible, get the basics out of the way, address those frequently opened support tickets that tend to be how-to questions, get that stuff all addressed, and then let your CSMs do the white glove, high touch service that makes the customer feel like they know them. And so I think if you can strike that balance, you have a great, symbiotic relationship.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's not an either or, right? It's a complement. And to your point, and I love that you feel this way. The education belongs in that customer success organization because it is an element, right? And there's a lot of stuff that it's very customer supportive, but it's also internally supportive as well. That education that you're providing to your customers is also a way for you to help you internally scale.
Yes.
I think there's a really good point in there in the fact that two things. One is that you see customer education being sponsored from different groups. I mean, maybe similar to Danielle, I've reported to many different leaders in the organization. I've reported into marketing. I've reported into legal one time. Won't talk about that right now. That was fun. But I've reported to customer success the most in my career. And so I think there's a reason for both of those things. I think number one, there's a reason why customer education can be picked up and sponsored by many different groups in the company, because it is truly a cross-functional company-wide task and responsibility to educate the customer, to get them to meaningful value of the product. And in fact, even bigger than that, to build the market around their product, whether it's at the account level or at the user level. We can get into all of that. But there's a reason, I think, why increasingly customer success leaders are the ones who are really picking up the mantle to sponsor customer success and to build these programs out. And in fact, the way that I've started describing it more is that customer education really is the scale engine of customer success. It really helps you do all the types of things you're already doing with the deep knowledge you have of the customer and the product, and scale that out to your entire customer base so that your CSMs and your very smart, talented individuals can spend their time on the more strategic pieces, whether that's education, account management, or otherwise.
Right. And going and customizing and personalizing. Right?
Customizing, personalizing, or in some...
You can have 100 different customers, and you could still provide a good chunk of that generic education and personalize that for each one.
Yeah, and I think Adam and Dave, you guys can chime in here because you have had the luxury of living inside CS organizations, but there seems to be a tipping point, right? It's when does knowledge mass get critical enough that you turn it into large scale education? There's kind of the early stuff. It's like there's not enough subject matter experts, there's not enough knowledge, so you have CSMs building, webinar series or one-on-one sessions and such to be able to impart this knowledge. And I think education teams have a responsibility at that tipping point to gather and capture, curate that content, and then make it scalable, right? So there's a good healthy balance, but you have to have very open communication between the two organizations to make that happen, and clear expectations, I think, as well help.
Yeah. And, the thing that's interesting is I'm seeing that tipping point start to get earlier and earlier as the years go by. It used to be you would invest in customer education way past that tipping point where there was already a mess and customers were reaching out and support burden was out of control and CSMs were all delivering random inconsistent trainings to different customers. And, when you switched a customer from CSM to CSM, all of a sudden they got completely different training. You added a new point of contact to the account. They got a completely different training, right? Like no one was investing in customer education until all of those problems were already spiraling out of control. And increasingly, this is really encouraging. I'm seeing customer success leaders and executives actually more, wider than that, really start to make this investment earlier so that they can prevent some of those problems from happening and really approach it more strategically, which is cool.
Yeah.
Yep. So how do you get started? Where do you where do you yeah, I know. Well, but I imagine that a bunch of these people are going, hey, this is great. I'm totally bought into it, but where do I start with this?
I want to jump on this first, Andrew, because I love this space. And I think the interesting thing about, Adam, you and I are very similar in this, and Danielle, you've been at a bunch of different companies as well, but the ones that I've loved, I've had the most fun with are those very early phase companies. You're talking like one company I joined, it was 50 people, just under 50 people, really small, right? Gainsight when I joined was in the 200s, Outreach was nearly 3. And each one of them had I love, Adam, how you approached the whole thing about saying, hey, we basically got a dumpster fire in every corner of the building raging out of control at some point. And in different companies that I've seen different dumpster fires and come in to deal with them. But to get started, I think this is one of the things that we've been talking about at C-Level a lot. There are some natural inclinations that we all have because, you're all smart people, you're talented, you've learned a lot, you've gone through our educational systems, and you know what? That's indoctrinated us into thinking and presenting and promoting content educationally in a certain way. We understand we've ingrained that pattern. The thing is, for customer education, you kind of got to break that barrier. I am a recovering perfectionist. That has been the biggest thing I've had to deal with and overcome as part of customer education, because I said all what I said to indicate the problem is, hey, let's start. I'm a leader. I want to start a program. Guess what you can do that'd be really easy? I appropriate one of my customer success managers who has a real interest in this, and I sit them down and say, you are now the blessed, holy subject matter expert of the company. Rock and roll, go. And they're like, okay, right. It's overwhelming. And then what we've been trying to do, or one of the things we've been trying to do, is like bring down that timbre, that tone, and say, look, you don't have to make perfect content. It has to be good enough. So one of the things, and everybody may have a different flavor on how they do it. One of the things I like to jump in on is say, okay, I get a lay of the land. I meet with subject matter experts. I meet with customers. I really understand. You're kind of doing what in certification circles you call a job task analysis. Understand how our product is being used. What are the workflows? What are the commonalities? How do the customer use it? How do we want them to use it? And that's done with a bunch of people and a bunch of meetings. But then when you go to build content, it's straightforward. Just start doing it. Roll a Zoom webinar, record it. Go to another subject, record it. Keep doing that, and then come back and start to make it good, make it look prettier, build your team, grow your function. But the thing that I always say is just start with something simple, right, and get moving. And don't worry about it. And my LMS friends, we know all the vendors might not like this. Maybe they do, but I always say, don't worry about all that first. Build some content, and then all of those pieces are natural. They're emergent things that come out of that journey. And that gets you started. And then you can worry about, you figure on solving your problem. What is your problem? How do you start giving content to a customer? And don't worry about perfection. Perfect is the enemy of done. You're never going to get anywhere if you worry about that. So just start. Find somebody, get going.
Agree. Let me just tackle that from another angle, because I think it's tempting with a question like this to kind of it depends it. So I'm going to answer this without saying it depends. There are two common places where I see people want to start with customer education from a customer success perspective, and I think these are the most common and probably the most correct. Number one is customer onboarding. You are probably, if you do not have a customer education program, you are probably onboarding your customers inconsistently. There's a million different decks floating around. All the onus is on the CSM. There's probably very little, if no, process in place. So that's the content you want to go standardize first. Put together a canonical onboarding training. And furthermore, if you've got a good customer education professional who is leading that initiative, have them focus on pulling it out of the world of feature tours and into the world of value. Why is the customer, should I care about using this product? What is it actually going to help me do? To Dave's point about the job task analysis, this is what is the customer's job to be done and how does the product help me do it? So that's number one. Number two is support deflection. You probably have that critical mass of top issues that are coming in. You can probably see what customers are searching for. You probably have ticket categorization in place. Your support agents know what customers are writing in all about. Is that documented? Is that in your knowledge base? Is that being trained proactively or surfaced to the customer? No, go after that. Those to me are the two places to start.
Yeah, that's the ticket deflection. That stuff is just a wealth. It provides you with so much great data. Hey, we keep getting the same question on this. Well, then let's freaking figure out how to explain it better and push it out to everybody. Right.
Yeah,
just a reminder, questions, use the Q&A functionality at the bottom to ask any questions that you got. I'm sorry, go ahead, Danielle.
No worries. I'm going to pile on from a slightly different angle, and it's not it depends. I think it's an additive. And that is, over the years, it's been really fun to watch the evolution of customer education from formal, monolithic, event-driven to meet the learner where they are, just in time, googly, got my information, to communities, to just open knowledge sharing. And so I think as a customer education person, and even if you're not a customer education person, if you have any interest in that and you want to help people, just compiling communities, forums, places to go before you even build content is even a great start, right? So, to Dave's point, I had a lot of fun building the Hortonworks learning team from scratch. And that was such a hotbed of big data and data science. And we were making it up as we went along, right? Nobody knew, what that role really looked like. And the day that we turned on our not super well designed online learning, because to your point, just getting it out there good enough, we have 56,000 people sign up on the first day.
Awesome.
That is super exciting. But what we were, I think, simultaneously doing, and I think companies like Salesforce and HubSpot have done great jobs, is they're also minting a future workforce, right? They're making the market. And our friend that we were talking about earlier, Bill Cushard, talks about this a lot, right? Is how do you make a market? What's our responsibility to provide talent to our customers, partners, and ourselves so that the products are sticky around the board, around the whole spectrum of people. So asking yourself the why am I doing this? Am I doing this to keep customers renewing? Am I doing it for support deflection, as Adam states? Am I doing it to make money, right? Which I think a lot of education organizations are really asking themselves the question today, should we be in this for the revenue? Or is it really about long-term customer relationships? And so it's a really fun space to be in.
That's an interesting topic, because on the one hand, I as you know, and our experience together, Danielle, I'm very much supportive of people paying something for the education because they're putting skin in the game. They're going to take it a lot more seriously. But the other side of that, which I also understand, is, well, if we're a subscription business and our value as an organization is based off of playing a long game, increasing customer lifetime value so that the unit economics, make sense for us as an organization, should that training then be included? Because that's how our value as a company is viewed, not by the education revenue we brought in, but the fact that those customers are achieving their desired outcomes, are getting value out of the platform, and they're doing that because we're enabling them to, and that results in increased customer lifetime value.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think Danielle mentioned the phrase earlier, feed a free spectrum.
Yeah.
That's true, right? I think that's where a lot of our programs get to. And increasingly, like you mentioned, we're moving away from this world where the prime directive of education services is the education services P&L, and thinking now a little bit more critically about what role does customer education play in supporting the overall SaaS revenue, right? So I think of customer education as really one of the tipping points, or at least a lever that you can pull in terms of your CAC LTV ratio, right? If you can show not necessarily the revenue that you're pulling in through customer education, but the impact on customer lifetime value, on renewals, expansion, all the things that Dave mentioned earlier that we know are going to be predictors of increased revenue from your customers for longer, for more renewal cycles. Like, a more educated customer is typically going to be a stickier customer. Now, that said, I do think there are a lot of good scenarios where you actually should be putting a price tag on some of your training offerings. And it's not an all or nothing. I think there's two. One is anything that requires kind of an undue amount of manual work from your team. So if that's super customized trainings or in-person events that are going to require a lot of event logistics, things like that might be a little bit more manual, require a little bit more infrastructure, aren't necessarily going to scale. Those to me are, makes a lot of sense to put a price tag on, and often customers recognize why you're doing that. But there is another category. There are certain offerings where value perception will drive you to want to make it a paid offering. Certification programs can be like this, for instance, where if there is a perception that this is something that you can take into the market, or that, again, this is something where you really want the customer to have skin in the game, putting a price tag on it is a really good way to drive value perception. That said, you can't just be putting the price tag on it for the sake of putting the price tag on it and then discounting it on the back end all the time. If the customer didn't pay for it, doesn't always mean they're actually going to go through it.
and there's definitely something to that, and I've used that myself in my career.
I wanted to pile on this as well. It's I love the conversation of free versus free. You look up some of the TSIA stuff, but I also want to go back to where we just started. So if you're a leader just starting out, I would recommend this. Think about pricing and all that kind of stuff, but leave yourself space. One of the most frustrating things coming into an organization, I think I had one of these experiences where we're already talking about money, and that's almost detrimental to really getting to the value the value prop for the customer of how this is going to help them solve a problem. Yeah, I can build a training program and pay for it. Yeah, I can build a certification and charge for it. But including, I always use the language, included in your subscription is on-demand content. And I start there first. And I start because what you can do then is use that as your ramp for other things. You have to build the material.
Right.
And that's if you rush to worry about pricing, you're going to sacrifice the core goal, which is to really think about building some content to begin with. You're going to be pulling yourself along and saying, I got to build this class. I got to pay for it. Although, you might go to the flip side, and I don't want to confuse myself. I say, don't worry about it initially, start thinking about it. But folks we talked about Bill Cushard. He has kind of an opposing view, which I like to bring into the view. It's hey, say I'm going to build a class. You could set that as a driver for you too. If you're predisposed to this, set a price tag on it and use that to kind of self-fund. So this it depends, but my encouragement is to don't box yourself in too early on fee-based learning. Give yourself some space and breathing room to understand where you're going, but then come back and strategically build your roadmap to include it if your company needs that.
And I think that's kind of rooted in a perception that being able to self-fund and being able to drive revenue gives you a seat at the table and keeps you out of the position where you have to keep going back to the well asking for additional funding, which is valid. But I don't think it substitutes for actual executive sponsorship. If I'm going back and showing them my education revenue, And compared to license revenue, I get laughed out of the building. Like, I'm not really getting
Yeah. Exactly.
to a lot of my leaders that I've talked to, like, that's not as inspiring as talking about the impact that it's going to have on the customer and on the growth of the business.
Yeah, I want to tell this story real quick because I think this is really relevant. You're talking about impact. We're talking about executive leaderships. We're talking about you as the customer success leader trying to go to your CEO and saying, I need money for this. I need budget. Here's something that happened recently to me. I was presenting results of a QBR with our LMS vendor to our leadership. And actually, I wasn't presenting it. My manager was presenting to her leader. And she said, oh my God, there was a moment of complete silence when they looked at the trajectory of our on-demand content. It was up and to the right, and it had these inflection points where you could see a plateau, and then it go up, and a plateau, and it go up. My SVP was like, wow. The CEO massively took screenshots and scribbled notes and went off to talk to some people. But that alone set the stage, because what value they saw was that, oh my God, how many customers have found this education and they're consuming it at a high velocity, and even without actually correlating, which, Adam and I get into a lot in talking about correlation and causation. That was enough. And they said, sold, this is working. So you don't, like, again, we're kind of building a safety net in here as you build a program. Don't feel like you have to totally sell your life away. You can build to it, but there's very discrete things you can do and then start to evolve and transform as you go along.
So let's that makes sense. That makes sense. And yeah, so I love the concept of thinking about pricing, but especially if you are just getting started, you definitely, this is not about making money. I mean, it's not about making money through education. It's about making money through CLTV. It's about making money through adoption, through renewals, through expansion. Right? That's where your mind needs to be at. So we got some questions. So let's start answering some of these. So Brett, thanks for the question. Brett asks, for our clients, we have main points of contact or admins that we mainly work with as CSMs. Typically, our one-to-many education events have only been for these points of contact to help them drive adoption in their organization versus their end user. So it's almost like a train the trainer, it sounds like, right? I know it depends on various things, but do you have any thoughts, recommendations, experience with one group versus the other? So dealing with these points of contact where we're doing a train the trainer type of approach versus the actual end users. Anybody have something to say for that, for Brett?
I can jump on if nobody else has. I've been struggling with the train the trainer concept, and I use air quotes specifically because it's kind of a hot topic for us in at least some of the circles I run in. What does train the trainer mean? It could mean a lot of different things. It could mean you're actually trying to work with a customer enablement team to train an individual there to get them to do the training. And
Yep.
I think one of the things that we've actually challenged the phrasing of it. It's more like train the expert or train, like there's two different.
How about train the advocate?
Train the advocate. Yeah. We've gotten into these motions of where, well, they really don't want train the trainer, because to us, train the trainer means something palpable and concrete. It's, Andrew, you've got a company, you're at Oracle and you're doing all these things and you're the enablement person. I'm going to sit down and take you through all of our stuff, teach you how to do it like I would, and then you go. Right? That's classic train the trainer.
Train the trainer, exactly.
Train the advocate is a wholly different thing. It's like, this is where you go. This is the material you can consume. This is who you call. This is how you get into it. It's the constellation of the educational framework and the support structure that gets people to learning, right? In true education. This is all of it. And I think that's more important in getting people connected and actually getting. I like to get to the end users directly, because then you can answer more complicated and interesting questions. But then there's a caveat. So I think maybe the edge of what you're trying to say here is that, there is kind of an intermediary angle in that. You're like working to elevate these certain people like admins, who those people are going to go out and actually really deeply engage and solve problems. So that's actually a scale, right? It's helping. And that could allow my org, as having, like, I have trainers and I have instructional designers, but then I can have a trainer kind of in a coach, trusted partner relationship, working to manage other, or like collaborate with others to accelerate that training in a different capacity. So yeah, it's a little weird, but I've done it, I've seen it, and I know what you're talking about.
This is something that we were really successful at Business Objects, actually, was identifying key people in the organization. So these are end users, though, right? Mm-hmm. But for example, with Wells Fargo, right, there was an enablement team that was responsible for doing the training, but I also located key people that were advocates for us, and I doubled down on providing them with training and support, and because they're doing it's not that formal train the trainer thing, right? But they are providing that with that additional expertise, support for the user base.
Yeah, like train the trainer as a term is a bit of a hornet's nest in the context of SaaS customer education. So I don't like to go there unless I specifically need to go there. But I think like there is actually something very valid and important, and I almost matrix it out in my mind. I'm kind of working on developing this thought. But in my mind, if you were to put this in a 4-quadrant matrix, on one axis, you have educating the user versus educating the account. Educating the account means you need to have a plan to orchestrate across all the roles who are going to influence, all the roles who are actually going to build, and make sure that they're able to do the things that they need to be able to do to make that account successful, right? But then you have end users who are also in need of education, and especially for a product like Slack, where using Slack as a team sport, everyone's got to have the right etiquette, everyone's got to buy into the process. Like, your end users may be more or less important to the overall strategy, just depending on how your product works. But on the other axis, I kind of put high intent to low intent. Maybe this isn't exactly the right way of thinking about it, but you're going to have a certain subset of folks at the account level and at the user level who really are invested in making this process successful, or really are invested in building their careers on top of your product. And those folks are going to pull information typically from you. Right. You're not necessarily going to need to meet them where they are because they're already coming to you and saying, I want this, versus you probably have a much larger population of end users where you do really want to focus on meeting them where they are. Contextual support, contextual help, knowledge base articles when they go search for something on Google. So I think like that's part of how to think about that, that matrix.
Yeah. And so for Brett's question, which, by the way, he didn't use the term train the trainer, I did. But I think Brett, you might want to think about how do we approach those points of contact, those admin, with that advocate spin, right? We want these people to become advocates. We want them to become experts. If you don't have direct access to those end users, right? We need them to be besides being competent, we need them to be raving fans.
Yeah, and give them the tools to be able to find training without necessarily having their admin be the gatekeeper of it.
Yeah, exactly. And honestly, driving adoption, that change management exercise we're doing, is not something that you should be doing on your own. It is an enablement exercise. We're enabling and we're providing the key stakeholders inside of a company's, inside of that organization with the tools, and the guidance for them to drive it internally. Because we as a vendor do not have the same type of impact and influence that internal folks have. So the next question comes from Claire, and Danielle, looks like you want to jump in on this. What types of content do you focus on providing? Videos, knowledge base articles, documents, and where are you hosting all this content? Is it publicly accessible, or does it require authentication?
Yeah, so all of the above. I think, as I mentioned earlier, part of the fun about the growth of education is that it's a blend, right? It's a mix: formal, informal, documents, knowledge base articles, videos, webinars, you name it, live events, virtual instructor led, all of it. And I think, the question about where it's hosted, we could probably spend a week. There's probably 50 different systems inside your organization. The biggest issue I see in this world is they don't talk to one another. So you get a lot of duplication and duplicate content, and the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. So if you have a knowledge management strategy, a committee, a working group, something where you can at least get all of these people in the room and say, hey, I know you're tackling the how-to questions and support. Let's package them up into a course or whatever it might be, a 2-minute video, et cetera. But getting all of those key stakeholders, I just started a knowledge council in my company because there are 3 of us who have enablement/education functions and needs, and lots of duplicate content, lots of great stuff living on people's laptops that doesn't even make it into a system, right? So that is a hard question to answer. There are certainly a multitude of systems, and if you guys, Adam and Dave, hopefully you guys will share your Slack channel at the end of this. That's a wealth of knowledge, a great place to get information and join some astute groups to ask these questions on systems. The question about whether or not it's publicly accessible or not, this is a burning issue for me right now because I work at a company that's locked all access to education, including our course catalog, behind a login, and you have to be a customer. And I cannot get my head around that whatsoever. So one of my biggest goals is to unlock that, right? For prospects, for people who are looking to make changes, for end users or poking around. I firmly believe that at least a good set of your foundational content, or even learning journeys, paths, profiles, whatever it might be, should be publicly accessible. I mean, we're just not living in the age where knowledge is locked down like that anymore. And I think there's some great companies who have minted a workforce and made resume impactful learning available to everybody because they've made it publicly accessible. So again, it is related to what your mission is, and do you have some sort of proprietary thing that you don't want your competitors to see? But even that's dodgy. I don't think anybody.
Yeah. I mean, then you got to question. Well, it shouldn't even be there, right?
Yeah.
It shouldn't be in a customer education.
That's right.
People overestimate, I think, the sensitivity of a lot of the knowledge that's contained. Oh, the competitors are going to find out our secret sauce. If competitors are looking at your knowledge-based articles to find your secret sauce, I would argue in most cases, the value of your customers being able to find that information and get value from your product outweighs the sensitivity to the customer or to the competitors.
100% agree.
Yeah, most likely your competitor already knows everything about you anyway, and it's already trying to copy it.
Right, they'll find they'll log in. They'll get a customer to go through the login gate and
somebody knows
and
somebody.
They'll share it. It happens all the time.
Exactly.
I wanted to tap on this just briefly as well. Is that Danielle, the points that you're making and your mission to get things unlocked is shared. There is one edge to that I've experienced, is that having been on the flip side where we ungated all of our content and made it super easy for anybody to come in and just make a simple login and do whatever you want, then that actually ends up in a data disaster. The cases that where I ungated, you can do 2 different angles with that. One is don't care, and you let everybody in, and you basically generically track and monitor how adoption is happening with that content. Then you lose the account, you lose the customer. You just have kind of aggregate understanding of what people are doing, and that's in a completely ungated solution. And then the flip side of that is you use single sign-on or something like that, which then you're now locked down. I vie for whatever gets you the most important information that you need. If you don't care, fine, throw it on YouTube, get it out there. And actually, there's a real valid, I liked what you said, Danielle, where it's get some of that content out, get it out there, get some content, make it for YouTube, make it easy to find. But then there is an understanding, in a layering, where I start getting into the deeper dives. I want to actually track the journey of the individual,
right,
and be able to understand how they're touching, what the learning interventions are doing. How does that actually translate and correlate to adoption? That's where this is a really sticky topic. But if you're just starting out, hell, throw it all out there live on YouTube, structure it, make it easy for people to get to, don't gate it. But you have to play that line. It's a fine balance.
Personally, I like at least the free registration. So to your point, at least I have some data points, right? And even if it's a personal email address, I can use products like Clearbit to enrich the data bit and make some assumptions. If I see somebody coming in, consistently, they're part of this other company that's with a competitor, and maybe what they're doing is they're they're assessing us. But yeah, I think you want to give people access to that information, right?
It's just, in many cases, it's just like the juice isn't worth the squeeze on trying to protect yourself from prying eyes on the competitor side. And like, frankly, what I think is going to happen increasingly is your competitors are going to be making their knowledge and education public. And if they get there before you, they have a much higher likelihood of owning the market. Now, I just want to make one more point that was in the original question, which is what types of content, videos, KB articles, documents. Yes, all of the above. I agree with Danielle. One thing to think about as you start producing that content is anything you create, you got to maintain. So, especially, like Danielle made the point about content strategy. I completely agree. You got to think about how you're going to keep this updated, especially if you're a SaaS product and you update on a really frequent cadence, or as you develop new best practices. So just think about that from a production perspective. Like, you don't want to necessarily invest in super high production value for things that aren't evergreen.
We're going through that process right now with our content, but we thought of that going into it. And so the decks that we use in our live training are the same decks that we use for our online learning, right? And the customization is, of course, in our delivery and our ability to go deeper in different subjects when people ask questions. But we're going through a refresh right now. So you need to be refreshing the content. This isn't a freaking Ronco oven where you set it and forget it. Right. For those of you, see, I knew a couple of you would understand that reference, right?
I'm showing my age now. Thanks for that, Andrew.
Yeah. Those midnight seen on TV ads. But still, yeah. I mean, it's just like customer success. You got to constantly be tweaking it and tuning it and refreshing it and refining it, right? So, hey, could you, thanks, Claire, for that question. Danielle, can you hit done on that so it disappears for me? The next one is from Ashley. Ashley and Adam wants to jump into this. Ashley, what are your recommendations around what metrics to look at for proving the impact of customer education versus other factors? In other words, showing that a customer renewed because of customer education versus other CS changes or feature improvements.
Okay, I'm going to share a couple of thoughts, and I would love to hear the other panelists take on this because I know we all care deeply about measurement and proving impact. One thing that I would say before I dive too deeply into the impact metrics is, from a measurement perspective, you often want to get your operational metrics in place so you can actually make decisions about your business before you start doing impact metrics. So I find it really helpful before I start going for all the correlation analyses to start by having some sort of discoverability or consumption metric and some sort of value metric for every piece of content that I produce. That helps me actually maintain the content over time to the point that we were talking about a moment ago. So I can see if something is very highly discoverable, but low value, i.e. gets a ton of page views, but a bunch of downvotes, or a lot of people register for this class and they give really low scores to it. That's the stuff you got to go fix immediately. Or conversely, if something is getting really low discoverability and high value, like people like it when they find it, that's the stuff you go and expose. If something is low on both fronts, that's the stuff you can get rid of, right? So you don't have to keep maintaining it over time. You have to know what to sunset. Now, I think that's like hygiene, right? Running a really hygienic customer education program is the first step to being able to show impact, because you have to be able to focus on the right things. Now, that said, and this is where I know Dave has a lot of passion as well. What I like to do, and Dave, what I think you like to do too, is use some sort of data connector to get the data out of your different systems. And Danielle, you made this point too, right? Like, often the systems aren't talking to each other. So you have to get it into whatever other source of record system you use, whether that's your data warehouse, your CRM, so on and so forth, right? What I like to do then is, wherever that business data is available, like my product adoption data, my renewal data, is to actually do that sort of correlation analysis, where I can show customers who did versus didn't take training are X% likely to adopt the product within the first 30, 60, 90 days, are X likely to renew their account, are X likely to expand. And just being able to frame it up as those pretty simple correlation analyses, and to be able to contrast the cohorts of did versus didn't, to me, that's often enough to make the type of case that I want to make to my executives. Because when you start going too far down that path, like people are going to start asking you about correlation versus causation. How do we know that it was education that did this versus other factors? And I think that that is kind of a false grail when it comes to education reporting, because what you're really being asked there is prove to me that customer education matters. There are a lot of other ways to prove that customer education matters. And in fact, what I would say is that if your most successful customers are the ones who are using customer education, so i.e., you would completely reverse causation, that's still really important. That still speaks to the value of customer education, because that means your customers who are renewing, who are expanding, who are adopting your product are saying, we need to use customer education to be able to do that. So that story works both ways. And I wouldn't get too hung up on the causation versus correlation. To me, being able to prove the ROI in those terms is no substitute for actually having executive sponsorship for your program and really getting them bought in on the story.
Love that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Danielle, Dave, anything to add? I think Adam did a great job.
I can add that.
Adam cleared it there. That's great.
The only other thing that I would add is that everything, Adam, you just said 100%. The caveat is that sometimes this is very hard to do, to measure, to really, it's not hard to collect data. It's hard to get insights from data. So it's one of the things that I would add on to what Adam said and say, if you're starting a program, you have a new leader, that's their first mission. Think about metrics, think about that, start collecting the data, and then analyzing the data is going to take a lot more effort, but start having the conversations, work towards it. There's very simple things. Let's move on, but I just wanted to add that one point. Danielle, did you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah. So along that point, one of the most underrepresented roles in a customer education function would be a really good data analyst, right? A really good business analyst. And I think for years, Andrew and I worked at a business intelligence company together for, 10 odd years. Well, I was there for 10 years. And we didn't even think to put a data person in our program, right? Ridiculous. But I think we've all gotten smarter, the addition of learning experience designers, user experience designers, and data analysts, I think are critical as this whole world evolves. So yeah, I fully agree with you. Anybody who can see the patterns in the data is just so valuable to your organization.
And if you have a data science team or a BI team, buy them a box of chocolates and have them do a regression analysis. Like
exactly.
they can help you with that too.
Yeah. And if you find yourself in a position where you fall under the customer success team, you have a customer success ops person.
Yeah.
That's somebody who can take on those types of projects as well.
Yeah, totally.
So, okay, excellent. And just a reminder, we do not end at the top of the hour. We go 15 minutes past the hour. So if you can stick around, we're going to keep answering questions. So our next question, which Dave wants to jump into, from Linnea. I hope I pronounced that right. Linnea from Sweden. Thanks for joining us. In case you are scaling a company and need to scale, and meaning going from instructor-led training and replace this with video. So going from instructor-led training to online learning, how can you convince customers that they still need to pay as much as they see lower value in videos? Okay, so this is a pricing question. And Dave, you want to jump into that?
I think this is really interesting. So Linnea, thanks for that. I kind of want to back up just a little bit and talk about the bigger picture, because it sounds like, okay, I'll tell you a story of one of the things that I had found very successful. And when I got to that inflection point, what I did. When I started at Gainsight, we were really bereft of any kind of educational, like we had no live training at all. We had very little university type training. We had to build all that. And we were very early phase, so it's not a surprise and it was expectation. So here you are, you're first starting to do stuff. One of the things that I actually like to do when I start at a very early phase company and I don't have a lot of stuff is start with webinars or start with live trainings that are scheduled. It's easy, right? So let's say, okay, what is it? June now. Let's say July 1st, if it were a Monday, I'd start my first training class, and I'm going to do that class periodically, and the customer is paying for that, right? Commonly, when I started out, I didn't actually ask the customer to pay for that. I did a beta motif where I'd say, hey, we're going to test it out. We're trying this out. It's new, right? Now, you may be in a different situation where I've seen companies do this, and companies start off doing live training because it seems to make sense, but it's a trap, right? The trap is if you're growing in scale. The trap is, oh my gosh, I've got to do more and more training. I've seen trainers just get pummeled to death. They've had wall-to-wall 10 hours training a day, and they keep going. And now what you're probably saying is, oh, I want to start scaling. I want to bring this down. I want to use those trainers more effectively. I think that the payment thing is going to be a sticky wicket. What I would actually suggest is a couple things. One, I think it's really easy to start. Like if you just wanted to start introducing scale, take that. This isn't perfect, but take that instructor-led cycle. So let's say Monday at 10 o'clock a.m., whatever your local time is, they start the training, record it, put it in your university or put it somewhere online. People can access that on demand at any time. Now it's a both and. Miss the training, there it is. It's not just Zoom sent me a link afterwards to the video. There's that video right there. Maybe you do these less frequently, record periodically, and as you go, you're actually improving the quality of that recorded video. Now, the payment thing is different. I mean, you could come in and say, okay, well, I'm scaling. Now, caveat being, if you're doing a custom training, right? If your training is specifically customized to an account with all of their workflows and stuff, it's going to be hard. This is more like a generalized training. If you're not customizing it, if it's generalized already, then leave it as a both and just decrease the frequency of your live training schedule. It's still there. It's still available. You can still pay for it. Or you start making that a premium offer, as Maria Manning Chapman would like to start to encourage you to do. Think about how you stratify your pricing schema, right? Hey, you want it, and this is actually what I do intentionally. I'll set a high price for the live training. I'll have a public free included in your subscription training. So if you want a live trainer, but you don't want to pay for that, you got it. And then everything else is on demand. And that's a little bit higher production value. So you start to stratify and you give these different options. And, depending on your budget and your resources, you might have to flex with that. But that's how I would approach it. Make another offer, on demand it, say that it's included, decrease your frequency. And then for those customers that demand it, they can still pay for that training and get it. And then you're actually helping all the different kinds of people, because a lot of people are happy with self-serve. It's fine. It's good enough.
Now, I love it. Great response, Dave. I do have a counterpoint.
Go for it.
For your suggestion that it's a trap. It's a trap. Right. So
movie reference.
So when I was at Burst, and maybe this is because it was a more technical training. We created a 1-week boot camp to teach you basics of data warehousing, how to write ETL, how to develop reports using our product. Mm-hmm. We purposely did that as instructor-led training to start, so we could get the program down, get the program together. It was 40 hours of content. And so I had my head of training start, build that program out and start delivering it. And she delivered it consistently for about 9 months until we worked out all of the kinks with those live participants. And then we created an online learning version of the entire program with, and then we added in some office hours for real-time Q&A. So I think that there's an argument for taking that approach as well.
Well, the value in that, Andrew, this is clear. You can tell your customers who throw an objection, well, I don't pay for that. It's not live. Well, it's partially live, but you know what? I developed this course over a course of a year. We've done it. This is the best of breed. Now you can do it on demand in your own time and your own pace. Exactly. And we have the office hours, so you can still get good time. Yeah, I think that's a really good ad, and it's a really good way of looking at it.
I think there's a case that when we started our coaching program, we started initially as a 24-week coaching program, live conversations, online content consumption, and then we adjusted. So, I mean, I think you need to. It's a lot has to do with your, what your product is and the complexity of the training and all this. Lots of variables, but there's definitely. I think it's not. Once again, it's not an either or, right? Yeah. And there is a bit of a depend. So if you can thank you, Linnea, for that question, Dave. Thank you for that answer. Next question comes from Tatiana. what tools can you suggest for offering quick in-product tutorials based on the user behavior rather than sending them away to the Learning Center on a different page?
Not an either or. You typically want both a Learning Center and in-product education, because in-product education, you only have so much surface area to work with.
Right.
So that is kind of like the front door to a Learning Center. So with that said, the ones I typically see most used in the space would be WalkMe, Pendo.
Yeah.
Gainsight has a PX offering. AppFuse.
AppFuse, right? Yeah.
Whatafix, Ansili. Yeah, there's a bunch of them.
Yeah, there's a number of them out there. So,
digital adoption platforms is typically how they market themselves. So if you look for digital adoption platforms, you'll see a bunch of them. But I think we covered most of the market leaders.
It's got to be once again, to your point, it's got to be complementary.
Iridize, yeah.
Right. We want it to be complementary.
Well, and I don't underestimate the development effort it takes to put in-product training together, right?
It's not a magic bullet.
It's not a magic wand. Right? You need to have. Yeah. It's not like I'm speaking from experience or anything.
Oh no! It's going to be easy. It's going to be great.
Right. Regardless of what the tool is and what the vendor will tell you, and we all work in software, and we all tell you that it makes your your dinner and folds your laundry for you.
Right.
The effort is big, and you have to get your product engineering team buy-in to get access to that kind of an environment. So,
especially ones that are going to queue off of user data.
Yeah, small commercial for that.
That's where your the tech support, right? The FAQs, those things can become incredibly handy, right? Because they inform, hey, we have a lot of data that shows customers keep tripping up right here.
Yeah.
Right. So let's add that to it, right?
Yeah. We did that at Optimizely. It was very successful in deflecting some of those most common tickets. Yeah. Gotta choose your battles.
Exactly.
Everywhere.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you, Tatiana, for that question. Next, from anonymous attendee, and unfortunately, I don't know whether anonymous attendee is even still here or not, but anonymous asks, and it sounds like Dave wants to jump in. Are there any frameworks that you use to organize your content for customer education and its various subtopics? For example, under a larger topic umbrella for a course, how do you decide which subtopic comes first and establish a consistent flow from there?
That's a great question and a fun one. I'll tell you how I do it. And I like to actually go back to the start. Like when I enter into a company, I spent time as a consultant, and I had a good fortune to learn a really good prototyping framework or methodology that I continue to use, which is very akin to Danielle, Adam, you may have done this if you've gone through certification programs as well. Going back to that kind of job task analysis, I always like to start looking at a platform, Outreach, Gainsight, Azuqua, wherever I've been. And so let's break this down, right? Let's really think about how each persona is using it, how within that persona, they're going to not focus on features, but what's their flow of work, right? What are the kinds of use cases and workflows? So I begin with a breakdown of that first. Who are the personas, right? Admin, end user. At Outreach, we have a sales development rep. We call that a prospector, someone that's like cold calling or emailing or trying to get your interest after you've filled out a form. And a closer, somebody that's account exec. And then an admin. And then there's another stratification layer in there too. So once you've defined who, then you start breaking down those use cases, like an admin. What does an admin really need to know? Well, a whole lot of things. They've got to do this and this. They've got to be aware of email regulations and spam can and all this other crap. There's a lot. So what your question, Anonymous, keys into is the complex challenge of actually trying to figure out a pathway for people to, I like to think of it first as self-enablement, but in general, even for courses, how do you articulate a structure that makes it clear and makes sense of the learning journey? So a lot of times I start off with just, okay, what are the core things that everybody needs to know? Let's build that. Here's a overview. Here's like core concepts. Here's a configuration. Those are able to, and then I start with the learning pathways and start breaking things down from there. I have been really tempted in the past, and I've moved away from this to think about the university. the United States university system with the 100, 200, 300, 400 levels. And I found it doesn't work anymore for me. It sometimes sets an impression that you're in a university, and well, what column I think a university, it's not. So I try to break things down into smallest topics that I can, but around use cases. So I tend to be, that first course might be a function feature overview, but then other courses like, hey, we're going to talk about how to use a sequence in outreach and what are the things involved in that. And maybe within that course, we may break down 3 separate modules, some being optional, right? So you're kind of grouping and putting things together, but in the context of how an actual customer is going to, understand and approach, first talk about change management, get that out of the way, objections, things that people don't know, setting expectations, and then starting at that and staying away from function, getting into workflow, and then things kind of fall out from there. And then there's always this junk left over, hey, this module doesn't fit anywhere. Well, you make a miscellaneous section and then throw it in there. That tends to be my approach.
It's a jobs to be done approach, which makes it that much more, once again, to your point, it helps you connect the dots that much easier to here's what you're doing and why you should care. Here's what the value you're going to get, right? Right. So I love the jobs to be done approach.
Yep.
Excellent. Thank you, Anonymous, if that is your real name. Let's see. Let's see how many we can get through now in the next 4 or 5 minutes. Tatiana asks, Adam, can you elaborate on the term educating the account?
Sure. I'm defining educating the account as opposed to educating the end user. So often users can access, education through a variety of methods, but when you're actually thinking about, say, onboarding an account versus onboarding an individual user in an account, you need to take a little bit more of a strategic lens to who are the different personas within that account, what are the different roles, and what do they need to be do? Again, like Dave mentioned, what are the jobs to be done for them to be successful? So if you think about like the life cycle of an account, the account might get onboarded at a different time than an individual user gets onboarded, if that's a helpful distinction.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Tatiana. Yaron asks, what's your view on finding the sweet spot between how the education leader believes the customer training should look like versus what the customer demands or suggests the training should look like?
Oh.
If you're not talking to your customers, I think you're probably missing the point, right? So that's a great question, because I think voice of the customer is huge, right? We can all go about developing training every which way we think is necessary. And then if you roll it out with 0 customer input, if you don't have a customer executive board or a customer, advisory board or a community that you can test this stuff on, I think you're going to probably miss the mark in quite a few ways. I mean, and that speaks to, I know I keep reiterating, but this last year in particular, when the world just went, like record scratch, the ability to radically pivot, for years, for example, I've been hearing, we can't do remote learning in APAC. We can't do remote learning in EMEA. People want to get in a room. They want to have a coffee. They want to have a chat. Sure, they absolutely do culturally, but when they had to, they did it, right? And now it's working well, and we're scaling it and we're tweaking it for the regions. But it took the voice of the customer coming back to us and saying, you know what, that wasn't so bad after all. You were right. We could do this. If we had just listened to, our sales reps who wanted a very high touch experience, we would never have made that pivot. So my opinion is voice of the customer included.
The sweet spot is, what does your customer want? How do they want to consume it? What format do they want to consume it in?
There is an edge there, though. There is one edge, and that edge is what you're saying is right, spot on, Danielle. But as you start getting into delivery, like particularly with live customized training, there is another angle where I get my trainers tell me this all the time. Oh my God, they want this and this and this, and I've only got this much time, and I could. There is the caveat of when you're actually doing that intervention, you do want to have somebody like an education leader may have some things that definitely need to get done in an order of precedence for a certain.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, it's not disagreeing with anything you're saying, but it's the other nuance to it that sometimes I've had customers say, I want this, and I want this, and I want this. And we come back and say, all right, well, I'm not going to say, what is the Rick Sanchez from Rick and Morty? Yeah, we'll go ahead and do it in the stupidest way possible. That's just fine. No, I understand that. I understand how you want to do that, but the outcome of that is actually not a good educational outcome.
Right.
And that's where a good education leader is going to have the voice of the customer in their hand, but they're also going to be able to go back to the customer and actually press back when that customer is asking for something that is not in their best interest. In where the customer is usually always right, there's sometimes where you should try as best you can to convince them of something else.
Especially when it comes down to them just like handing you a list of features, like we want to train on these specific things this specific way. Like, sometimes the customer is wrong about that. At Slack, one thing that we did was we actually aligned our basic curriculum that we use in most of our consulting engagements to actual user research that our team had done by speaking to actual customers. Right. So we did that at a program level. So now when we go and have engagements where we actually talk to customers and customers are like, oh, we want to train on like this advanced feature, this advanced feature, this advanced feature, we can come back to them and say, well, hold on. What does your team need to be able to do? What are the most important outcomes that you need to have in Slack from a performance perspective? We've developed this curriculum with those things in mind. So let's make sure that we cover these before we start layering on to talking about random features that aren't going to like actually stick in people's heads.
Totally.
Fully agree.
All right. So we got time for one last question that Zohar, it sounds like Dave wants to answer. What native systems are out there, if any, for correlating customer data for insight?
I'd like to say none, but I found one that kind of blew my mind that I didn't expect. It's Google Data Studio. I've used Tableau. I've used Microsoft, all the different products. I've used Excel. I've used Google Sheets. Frankly, you can do a lot to get insights out of a Google Sheet. But what I've found lately, particularly Adam, going back to the comment you said, about, hey, let's match my survey data with how people are finding content out live. Google Data Studio is actually pretty darn cool because I can easily get access to all my Google Analytics, all my reports and forms that I have running on Google. And I'm going to use this word again, Adam, munge it all together, and get like kind of a good overview before I have to work with like a BI team or an analytics team that can do it the right way. So, look up some tools like that. I think Power BI from Microsoft might have a light version. Tableau has some learning versions. There's a lot of tools out there, but if you're capable with working with data and doing some database type stuff, a lot of those systems are pretty amazing.
Excellent. Anything to add, Dave? I'm sorry, anything to add, Adam or Danielle? Sweet. All right. Well, we're at the end of our webinar. I think it went well, but it's not what I think. It's what all of you think. So please let us know by posting your feedback on LinkedIn and tagging us. I want to thank my amazing panel of guests for spending time with us today, as well as
Thank you for having us.
Yeah,
it's been awesome.
As I expected, it was an awesome conversation, and it was great seeing you all and talking to you all. And hopefully, at some point in the not too distant future, we'll be able to do this in person over a drink or many drinks.
Great.
But we all very much appreciate you making time in your busy schedule to provide these insights and best practices that you shared with us. One final note, great CS leaders know that they don't have all the answers, but they know where to get them. That's why we created the CS Leadership Roundtable, to harness the knowledge and experience of the community to help improve everyone. So we hope you got something out of this discussion, and we will see you at our next event on July 14th, when we'll discuss effectively delivering customer success to a high volume of lower cost accounts, which education, by the way, online education, important piece of that. So check out successcoaching.co to find out more and sign up. Until we see you again, have a great rest of your day, week, and month. Stay safe and stay healthy, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.